Hello and welcome. I'm going to call this meeting to order of the study session of the Finance Subcommittee of the Santa Fe Public School Board. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the salute to the New Mexico flag in English and in Spanish, as well as the acknowledgement of tribal land. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the Zia symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo la bandera del Estado de Nuevo México, el símbolo Zia de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas. And then the acknowledgement of tribal land. We acknowledge the original people of the land, the Tesuque Pueblo people and other tribal nations, and ask them to walk with us today as we share and learn together. Okay, we are on to approval of the agenda. Any additions or changes? Any? Board Member Carrillo.
We're not all here. So just wanted to...
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. And please let the record show Secretary Garcia is not here and he will not be coming. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. We're on to introduction of the interpreter. Mr. Salvarides.
Good afternoon, President Noble, school board members, Superintendent Dr. Garcia. My name is Mario Salvides, and I will assist with any translation request by members of the community who would like to address the Board of Education. I will be at the back of the room if my assistance is desired. Buenas tardes, Presidente Noble, miembros de la Junta Escolar y la Superintendente Doctora García. Mi nombre es Mario Salvides. Ayudaré con cualquier solicitud de traductor de miembros de la comunidad que desean dirigirse a la Junta de Educación. Estaré en la parte de atrás de la sala si alguien desea mi asistencia. Gracias.
Thank you very much. We are on public forum.
You want me to read them?
I would imagine we don't need to read the rules of engagement for Ms. Tillip, who's the only one signed up for public forum.
She knows how to behave.
She knows how to behave. Please, welcome. Take a microphone.
I brought copies of what I'm going to say, hopefully in less than 3 minutes. Somebody timing? Board members and Superintendent Garcia, I am sure you all know the importance of student wraparound services within our school community for the most at-risk and fragile students and their families. Dr. James Comer's model, this teamwork concept, promotes the collaboration of parents, educators, and community to improve student development. That in turn helps them achieve greater academic and overall school success. My thoughts come not so much as a teacher, for my first career is in management and administration of public health programs. So my lens of analysis is the administration, cost effectiveness, systems, personnel, staff development, and leadership, the bang for the buck. I personally know from my experience working with communities and schools, then known as cities and schools in Newark, New Jersey, what impact this program has had on individual lives. I saw it in 1991 with my own eyes as high school students who were marginalized had someone who paid attention to them individually. Ivan Corneo of CIS is working with a single mom and son who were evicted. Before getting help, they were living in their car. Sorry, I have to take a drink of water. Jose was going to drop out of school. Attendance grades were declining. Referred by a CHS counselor. Coordinator provided temporary housing. Also made a referral to Adelante. Jose is now on track to graduation. Ivan says, building a relationship with students is only doable in the school environment. I think the relationship with parents as well can only happen if we are located in the school where we see kids. Of these students, some I see 3 to 4 times a week. There are others I have to hunt down and see every 2 weeks or so. Sinte, referred by a teacher because Carlo was wearing dirty clothes. Family is single. Dad on the brink of homelessness. Was not passing any classes. With the help of Adelante, they obtained an apartment, helped Carlo find a job. Socially and academically, there is still uncertainty, but they are 100% better off. Oh, goodness.
You can just read the whole thing.
Thank you. I'm on the next page. Heather, CIS, and she's an MSW. I organized all the troubled behavioral truancy grades boys in the school. They all love basketball more than anything. They couldn't get on the team because of grades or attendance. I made this group for them to be able to express themselves through activity, have a reason to be excited about school other than academics. They meet once a week at lunch. I always have at least 10 boys. They are totally respectful. They never fight. They wanted me to do it twice a week. This is me speaking. I felt I needed to represent to you, the board, the importance of the services that communities and schools provides in our school district, and more specifically, Capitol High. And I listed the services. The personnel of CIS, Ivan, Heather, and Cynthia, are amazing role models and leaders. They come with love and a wealth of experience addressing the needs of our population. They are familiar with our school culture. It's easier to write than speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Board Member Cashman.
On a personal note, I read the article today where Ms. Tilp is going to be retiring, and I'd just like to say, having worked with you over the years, we're going to miss you in Santa Fe Public Schools, and you know, you've been a positive role model for our students, for our community, and so I don't know what your next chapter is, but I just wanted to say thank you for all you've done for the school
Thank
district.
you, Maureen. And the young man who wrote the article, who's sitting over there, told me it was going to be about the students going to Las Cruces. It's kind of about me, and that's not what was intended. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your service and for coming to see us today.
You will be missed.
Madam President?
Board Member Carrillo.
Ms. Tilp, thank you very much. And I'm sorry I can't make it Thursday evening when you'll be on it, because yeah. And but even your service on the CRC and just everything you've done for our kids, I know you've been very inspirational to them. And then also relative to what you gave us, it's going to be it's going to be in full on the record, but just for the people that are watching or that are here, there's a lot of things that were left out about specific things that communities and schools does, and clothes, food, support, family. I mean, so many different things. And really, we know that, and Glenn Weichel used to say when he was on this board, kids succeed when they feel that they're known. And communities and schools make sure that every kid is known. And that's also in this text. So thank you so much.
Okay, we are moving on to item 4 on the agenda, presentation and possible action. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Tonight, we will be presenting the entire operating budget. And if you look at page 2, we have the overview of what we'll be presenting to you tonight. I don't need to read it to you. We ask, as we have in other presentations, if you will write your questions or note them on the page, and then we will come back and answer those questions. Go to page 3, please. Page 2 has the overview. And so I'd like to go to page 3. So the board asked us to go back to the drawing board, and we pretty much literally did that in terms of working through this process. One question that we wanted to make sure that we could get to the bottom of and was to look at our cash balance. I know that that's something that was very important to the board. So we worked with Audrey Jaramillo from the Jaramillo Group, who was our external auditor. We also consulted with Michael Vigil from the Michael Vigil Group. We looked and scoured the entire operating budget, which went beyond operational. We looked at identifying new revenues and also where could we reduce expenditures. And we used the term reduction in expenditures because we were able to not cut services or program to work on this budget. You notice that the last bullet says considered board member input, and we did not say board input, and that is because you never voted as an entire board, but we listened to what, and a lot of times you had consensus on some things, but we looked at all the notes and all the themes that came from the various meetings thus far. Next slide. If you had gone into the war room, you would have seen multiple pages of paper with things crossed out and back and forth and tracking as we built the budget. And the reason that I talk about this is that when you see this presentation, it looks pretty easy and pretty smooth in terms of how we got to where we did. But I want to tell you that it was anything but easy. Between principals, cabinet, and directors, and this is a underestimate, is 200 plus hours, support staff about 125 hours to get to this. We looked at identifying various funding sources and could we tap legally into other sources of funding beyond operational to fund certain programs. We focused on maintaining solvency. I mean, obviously we have to have a balanced budget, but also is it sustainable? And so that was critically important to us. And a framework that supports instructional needs and the strategic plan with consideration to board member input. So the strategic plan was a backdrop as we looked at what we were doing. How does this fit with the strategic plan that the board approved this year? We also looked at current positions and funding sources. I want to point out that from the time that I came on board, there had already been cuts to the budget. And then if you remember, and then there were some that were allocated in the budget that were filled right when I got here. The following two budgets that we did, we had to make cuts. Do you remember? And we made cuts at the administrative level. I know that there will be some questions later about positions, and we're happy to answer them. There is an organizational chart that we provided for you that it's not updated. So, for example, it still shows probably Richard as a CFO instead of Edmond, but it pretty much is basically the same. There might be a few names that might be a little bit different, but we have not added positions. We have moved positions, and I was speaking to Ms. Noble a while ago, and I said, it'll look different next year. Every year, the org chart has changed because I move people around based on talent, skill, and what our major areas of focus are on a particular year of what we're doing. And so I think that org charts should be fairly flexible to meet the needs of the organization and the talent that you have at the time. I'm still not done with that slide. The other piece that we looked at in terms of sustainability, and as you look at this, is, and one struggle that we have, is looking at the cuts that we have received in small size funding that will continue on for another 3 years. We lost about $360,000. Ms. Cashman had asked if we would show membership on the SAC slide, and that is there for your review. So it was not easy in terms of being able to balance the budget. We had many things that worked against us. We have to fill out the budget questionnaire that asks us to talk about what were the main challenges. And I don't have it in front of me, but I know that we talked about one of them is the changes in the funding formula. The T&E and TCI cost us almost $2 million. Small size adjustment cost us, the $360,000. If you're a district with declining enrollment and happen to have small schools, it was a double whammy for us. And you will see this, but I just want to hit it again, in that overall, there was a 16% increase in funding at the state. That includes K-5 and extended learning. For the Santa Fe Public Schools, we saw roughly a 14% increase in funding. And because our general operating budget is close to $100 million, it comes out to 14%. 7%, or half of it, went to K-5 and extended learning. We got the dollar amounts. However, we are still looking if we're going to be able to meet the requirements. And there's some schools that we were not able to do it. Either the students have not enrolled, or we don't have the requirement of at least 4 teachers who are the receiving teachers. Right now we're looking at 11 or 12 schools for K-5. Extended learning, trying to remember, Debbie, do you remember? 22 schools will have extended learning opportunities. With that said, we will now be putting pencil to paper to see if it's going to be adequately funded. If it's going to cost the district more money than what we're getting, we're going to have a conversation with the state to see if they can either supplement the funding or we're going to have to turn it back. Because we have a balanced budget, but I don't have the flexibility necessarily to backfill. Again, just a big overview. In the $7.1 million or 7% in new revenue, 6.7 million was taken up for the raises, leaving very little for anything else. So with that said, we managed to get blood out of the turnip, but this is it. I don't see where in future budgets, unless we see significant increases in revenue, that we can cut this budget again to do anything new or out of the ordinary. If, for some reason we had an exorbitant increase in utilities or in insurance or any fixed costs without significant increases, we will have a difficult time. Granted, the Santa Fe Public Schools has done right by their employees, where we have funded, health benefits where other districts may not have. We have kept small size in our classrooms beyond what with the waivers that were given way back when. We also offer music and art at a level that other districts don't do. And so you have, over through the years, have done a great job of being able to put the resources where they're most needed, and that is in providing services to kids. But prospectively, I don't think we can work any more magic. The last 3 years, we've been able to balance the budget every year, and I just want to make sure that you're all aware of that, and that that's on the record, that we need whatever mandates come from the state, they have to be fully funded, because I don't see how we're going to work the magic again, is all I want to say. And with that, I'll fill in, and I'm going to turn it over to our CFO, Herman Martinez, and Richard Halford, Deputy CFO. And Mr. Martinez, when we get to capital and all of that, if you join the table, please.
Thank you, Board President. Chairman Noble and Superintendent Dr. Garcia. The way we're structuring this is to first have an overview of the operational budget and then go into discussion as far as the operating budget. The operational budget, which encompasses about $100 million as far as revenues and expenditures. So we did see that $7.1 million as an increase to the state equalization guarantee. There was $100,000 that was owed under the sale of the Connie building, which will be paid in installments during the 1920 fiscal year. And then we also identified another funding or revenue of an unrestricted grant. And all of these funding sources or revenues were classified as available funding sources for all of the programs and services that we have.
Excuse me, you said final payment here, and then you said there are going to be other payments in 2020?
Excuse me, this was the projected for the 1920 fiscal year. We are estimating the $100,000 to be received after July 1st. Yes.
Include, I mean, their funding. We also ask if you don't mind holding the questions till the end.
So,
It's okay.
so continuing the menu of items that were requested from the prior Finance Committee meeting, we basically put them all together as far as what were items that were previously discussed, and then some potential items that during that Finance Committee meeting were also identified as priorities for the board's consideration. So in that, we identified specifically items that had already been developed or programs that had already been put in place through these initiatives in the current fiscal year, and some of those that may not necessarily require continued funding that was outside of the baseline or outside of general allocations for fiscal year 1920. So we place specific dollar amounts to each of those items, and so there's a list between this slide and the next slide that identifies all of those items. Specifically, some of these that the district identified that we were able to put in to just general programs and services. The PACS was one of those items that we identified that was already in place, and we didn't need to identify any additional funding for. In addition, the attributes of the grad, computer science initiatives, were going to be funded out of the ETN.
Or not. And we actually have that contract in place with this fiscal year to finish what I need to do for 1920. I also want to point out that the menu of options and associated costs are based on your discussions, but we do list it as a menu of options. Obviously, the board has the prerogative to say, you know what, we would rather not do this and do that. What I want to point out is that anything that exceeds, if you go to the next page for a second, Edmond, anything that exceeds 1.2 million, we'd have to cut the budget some more. Okay, so we're just trying to stay within that. You want to go back to the previous slide? On the PACS program, the program is in place. We put about, I think there's like 400,000 in professional development and subs in the base budget. And so this is just the add-on that Ms. Sink, I think, needed 70,000 for the boosters, for PACS, so she'll be able to do that. It's covered in the base budget. And then, the computer science is what's in the ETN budget. The math and science initiatives will also go to Ms. Sink's towards professional development, materials and supplies. But please know that that's not all we're spending in those content areas. The same for first grade literacy. There's some that is covered under Title I, but there's a whole bunch of training that is all, and supplies that are also in her base budget.
So with this menu of items, and I'll continue on to the next page.
Before you do,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Edmond. So the $250,000, you'd seen it in the base budget, in this menu of options specifically for communities and schools. Based on various discussions with board members and from the community that have expressed a desire to want to be able to provide services, we are looking at a pool of dollars that would follow procurement for support services for at-risk students, of which communities and schools has been a primary provider.
So the items that are listed in black are the items that we had previously discussed as far as continuing those initiatives. And then the items in blue are items that were discussed during the April 22nd board meeting as far as new items for consideration. And so again, we took these back and had a discussion whether these items would need to be funded out of the operational or if there were other funding sources for these specific menu items. The additions to the school-based budgets was one of those that we identified at the prior committee meeting, and that was just based off of maintaining the baseline for each of the school sites, making sure that each of those sites that may not have specific economies of scales or just additional support that are baseline needs for those schools. So that's the $128,000. The vaping and the dyslexia we had previously identified as potential initiatives, but also sought through other potential funding grants, either through the state or local grants that might be able to support those specific initiatives. And then the attendance coaches, this was a state grant that was issued during the current fiscal year of about $200,000 that was below the line funding, and the state has indicated that these funds were no longer going to be provided below the line, that districts would need to provide those allocations above or in the regular operational budget.
To clarify, I think that specifically was that they said it was funded above the line, but as you know, the net available after raises would not cover this and the raises.
And then we also had a discussion as far as the additional nursing services, specifically a health professional, whether we could have one at each site. And through Sue O'Brien and her team, they were able to identify a 1.3 FTE that would be able to provide those services at all of our sites, which would, for a full time at each site every day, which was a very small amount just to be able to complete that initiative. The last one was the lead librarian, which we identified as either a stipend or a contract of $15,000. So the total of these menu options was $1.2 million. And again, if there were other items that the board would like to consider either changing some of those initiatives or allocating specific amounts to other items, those can also be for consideration. So in terms of the operational budget, with the $7.9 million in the new revenues, and then listing all of the other items that are new expenditures as far as either increases to salaries or increases to benefits, increases to fixed costs, and then also the initiatives that were proposed in the prior two slides. So those subtotaled items, we were $8.9 million, which essentially placed us in a funding or a net gap, if you will. Not specifically a deficit for the budget, but a gap between what our wants and what our needs are, and what the funding or what the revenues allow for. And so we're essentially at a gap of $1,055,000.
And I want to reiterate, because I don't know who's watching for the Journal. I know that Mr. Last is on vacation, and this was a discussion that I also had with Mr. Mullen, is that we don't have a structural deficit. If we had wants or things that we felt our school district needed, that could be 10 million, it could be 5 million, it could be 7 million, it could be 3 million. And I think that's where people get it wrong, that assume that we had a structural deficit of, X amount of dollars. So just to be clear, the budget planning process, budget's just that. It's a plan and it's a process. So the Santa Fe Public Schools is solvent. We don't have a structural deficit. This is just a gap in what people want and the immediate revenue that we saw. We obviously have to have a balanced budget, and we will, as you see in the next slide.
So taking that net gap and balancing through some reductions in expenditures, and emphasizing that specifically with the special ed services, there's not a decrease in services, but essentially a decrease in the number of students that were needing those services. So we had 170 seniors graduating, and of those overall eligible students that essentially decrease every year, we didn't have any specific services that were decreasing, just the number of students that were needing those services. So we do have IEPs with all of those students, and have in accordance with the federal regulations, meet all of the service requirements for each of those students that are on an IEP. So we essentially were realizing about a $900,000 decrease in the actual expenditures from special education.
On that point, which is why we're on prior year funding, because it is the hope of the legislature when we went to prior year funding that you'll adjust your budgets accordingly, so that, if you couldn't absorb it all, you have a year to plan for the following year.
The other reduction in expenditures, we also are realizing an indirect service cost credit, which we didn't realize in the prior fiscal year, but was an item that we had essentially identified as a potential reduction in costs, or essentially an indirect cost from a different program. Then we also had $50,000 that was allocated to a statistician position, which had not been filled, and we essentially captured the vacancy savings in that as well. So through those reduction in expenditures, we realized essentially the $1,055,000 that we had in the net gap as far as the fiscal year 2019-2020, which essentially balanced the budget. This next slide just gives an overall of the current fiscal year. This is fiscal year 18-19 and the projected or estimated cash balance. So through what we had realized in terms of cash and revenue for the current fiscal year, and then taking into consideration all of the expenditures, knowing that we haven't closed out the fiscal year, but we are anticipating about $109 million. And so with that, we should realize about a $5.6 million in terms of a cash balance. Now, we still have some other costs that may need to be captured through that cash balance, specifically the school nutrition. So some of those revenues or some of the fees that don't get collected by the end of this fiscal year, we'll have to capture through that cash balance.
Mr. Martinez, if I may. So what we're estimating for the 18-19 is a $5.2 million cash balance, and for by June 30th, we hope that it will be at 5.6. It's too early for us to estimate what it would be because we're planning a budget for 1920. And so, you know, it should be right in that ballpark. But just keep in mind, we're looking at the end of this fiscal year.
So in total, the operational budget, we have about 106 million in revenues from the state equalization guarantee. In addition to that, there are 4 million as far as additional or other revenue sources. And so I'll reference Appendix B if you'd like to just review what those other revenue sources are. And some of those specifically are related to local either ad valorem taxes or rents or indirect costs or just other revenue sources that we receive locally. So the total revenue for fiscal year 1920 is about 110 million. And then with that, we have baseline operational expenditures of about 102 million. And then we have salaries increases at about 7 million, benefits 572,000, utilities increase 80,000, and then the board initiatives at 1.2 million. And then we have those other reduction in expenditures that are listed there as well. So the total operational expenditures essentially matches the total total operational revenues of 110 million. This does not include the K-5 plus or the extended learning programs, although they will be distributed within the state equalization distribution each month. We are going to identify those separately as far as revenues for those specific programs. So the total operating budget then encompasses the operational and other specific funding sources as well. The special revenues, the capital outlay, and the debt service. And I'll go through those specifically in the next slide. From special revenue sources, we've received a few of the grants, initial allocations during the last month, and those are listed in the fiscal year 2020 column. And so you essentially have a side-by-side that shows the fiscal year 19, what we were allocated, and then the fiscal year 20. And some of those that are still shown as zero, we essentially haven't received any initial allocations through the state yet. Although we anticipate that most of these will continue, some of these specific grants, as mentioned before, the Truancy Initiative is one of those that may not be, that will not be a recurring grant. And then also there's others listed in there like the K3 Plus that essentially has been absorbed in the operational budget. So overall, in special revenue, we received about 21 million in allocations for the current fiscal year, and in the 2020 fiscal year, we're anticipating to receive about that same amount, but those will be realized in the next month or two.
Or even into September and October, because the federal budget has a different fiscal year.
So the next group of funding sources is the capital outlay. The bond building essentially is the general obligations bond, the EdTech note, and the mill levies, as well as the special capital outlay, which were appropriated specifically during the legislative session. And so these we are anticipating to maintain around the same allocation or revenue amount. We still have some funds that we will be that will be issued through bond sales during the next month for general obligation bond funds, and then also for the EdTech notes. So we're anticipating those to maintain about the same. The last group of funds is the debt service, and those specifically go towards payments of any bonds or any outstanding debt from the district. And specifically, some of them will go as either tax, local county tax collections, principal bond payments, interest payments, or other specific services that are provided through our finance team, like RBC Capital Markets or any other services that are rendered through the debt service itself. And so we're anticipating to maintain that debt service structure at about the same amount as well. Lastly, the total operating budget. You'll note that for 2018-2019 fiscal year, we were operating at about $278 million, and in the next fiscal year, we're anticipating about $260 million, well, with the caveat that some of the special revenue funds have not been realized, or we haven't received those initial allocations yet, but the funding amount should be relatively the same. And so these essentially break out in just categorical as far as the percentage that goes towards operational, and then the percentages that go towards each of those other funding amounts. So operational is about 37 to 41% of our budget, and then the next category is the special revenue, the capital outlay, which is about 24 to 27%, and then the debt service, which is about 28%, and then lastly the special revenue, which is about 7% of our operating budget. So this was essentially the presentation as far as the operating budget. We anticipate that some of the special revenues we should be receiving within the next few weeks, and we can update those specifically as far as when we receive them. But aside from those grants or those specific funding sources, we don't anticipate any major or significant changes to the operating budget.
This concludes this presentation, and now we're ready to take any and all questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Shall we go through from the beginning? All right.
Madam President, I forgot
Yes,
to point
Dr.
out
Garcia.
there are, you probably saw in your packet some appendices.
Mhm.
Do you all saw them? Okay, great.
Okay, I'm guessing no questions on pages 2 and 3. I would like to say on page 4 that I very much appreciate knowing some idea of what it's taken from the staff side of this, and given that we're at more than 300 hours, it shows. It's a great deal of work. Board Member Carrillo.
I would echo that, and I would also say that I want to thank you for having individual meetings with us, because I know that was really time-consuming, to go over things and, look for questions that we may have prior to this evening. So thank you.
For the general public, the superintendent met with each one of us individually for at least an hour, going over the budget.
Okay, moving on to page 5. Any questions on the operational budget? Board Member Carrillo.
On the Connie thing, I don't remember the original contract, and I'm not saying that I'm against them, you know, maybe 5 payments of 20 or whatever, but I don't recall when we sold that property having broken down this final 100 into payments. Yeah, you were with us, yeah. So what's up? We're doing this just because we're trying to help them out, they have a cash flow problem?
So what happened, Mr. President, members of the board, at the beginning of this fiscal year, I met with Mr. Luff. Are you president of the board? No, but he did come with the CEO from United Way, Ms. Catherine Freeman. And if I'm characterizing this incorrectly, please feel free to chime in. But my understanding is that they did not raise the amount of funds that they thought they would, and asked if they could pay us at the end of this fiscal year. And I agreed because I figured that they would be able to. They did come back and indicate that they were still having difficulty. And so we came to an arrangement that, and we made it clear that we can't carry this, would be against anti-donation. And if they guaranteed that if they have to get a loan or whatever they'll do, they will give us $25,000 each quarter to get, and more if they're able to get this paid by the end of the fiscal year. Am I characterizing it correctly?
Great, thank you.
And by way of disclosure and reminder, I do work for the United Way of Santa Fe County, so if we ever take action on this or anything related, I need to recuse myself and leave the room. No. I work for a different arm, but I've been told by lawyers just always disclose. Okay, moving on to page 6. Any questions here? Board Member Cashman.
This was a question I didn't think to ask when we had our meeting, but for the community support services for at-risk students, are we going to go out with a large contract or mini contracts or multiple how are we going to do that?
Madam President, members of the board, so there is $200,000 in the base and $250,000 for a total of $450,000 for communities and schools. From conversations with some board members, with community, various stakeholders, there have been issues around, other people would like to provide services. We also recognize that communities and schools brings in more as services to the district than what we pay for. I will be appointing, if the board approves this budget, either tonight or on the 21st, we'll put together a committee that, I'm looking at Sue O'Brien, but people like in Sue's team, in Ms. Sink's department, perhaps some principals, to work together to, and then I'll review it, an RFP. We will follow procurement. It is conceivable that some aspects of it could be sole source. We'll have to see. There's also funding from extended learning to provide services to at-risk youth that is not in this base budget, in the budget that you're approving tonight. So that's what we're looking at. I'm not sure how what the chunks will look like, but right now we're recommending that it be put in this format. That's about the best I can do. I don't know. Perhaps I'm not answering your question, so if I'm not, please feel free to ask me something more specific.
This is on this specific issue. Is that okay, Ms. Cashman? So I would say the extended learning money should stay with extended learning, and that this is sole source, and for at least this budget, we should treat it as sole source and have this 250 in addition to the 200 allotted toward communities and schools. And for me personally, I would say even in the future, that's the way we should address it. Because one of the things we heard from Ms. Tilp and that we hear from the principals at these schools that are served is that knowing the kids means you're at the school for more than a year or 2 or 3. It means you're following the kids. And if you're constantly going out to RFP and having every Tom, Dick, and Harry that wants to start a guidance counselor or a social worker, an independent contractor social work service, where there may be, just like we do with speech pathologists and other things, they could form some company, have other independent contractors that sign up, and then we have a contract with, ABC Group for social work, and then our kids don't have continuity of service. They aren't known, and I think we end up really shooting ourselves in the foot. And so I would be opposed to anything in this budget that goes that direction and in any way may impede their ability to count on the money that they receive from us starting on July 1st. And furthermore, I would say that this is the very reason we are a party to the lawsuit, at-risk youth. And when you heard Ms. Tilp speak and other folks speak on this issue, Communities in Schools is addressing the very specific need that Judge Singleton found that the state was not fulfilling. So I would not want to in any way jeopardize that by, at this time, going to RFP. If this is something the board wants, because this came up last year, and it's like if the board wanted to do that, the board had a year to come up with a policy, and the board didn't. So to do this at the 11th hour, I think, is fundamentally wrong and unfair to all of the people that work with CIS. And if it's something we want to address for the following budget, well, then we have a year to come up with something, but now's not the time to do that.
Madam President, on that point.
Dr. Garcia.
So I want to clarify that we do have to follow procurement, and procurement does
Right.
allow for sole source provision.
Right.
So, and that's part of the reason that I didn't recommend a policy last year when that was brought up, because how will you supersede procurement? I mean, you can't go out of procurement to say how you allocate funds. So, so when I say we'd follow procurement, does not necessarily mean that it would be a full all of it for RFP. I really don't know yet, but waiting to hear from direction from the board. If this is a point of contention around this issue, I would ask that, just for legal reasons, that the board would say, we hope that you will follow procurement on this piece, or to be clearer on the action of what is the sentiment of the entire board on this item, because I know that this is a very charged line item, not only for board members, but also for the community.
On that specific thing, we had our legal counsel determined that this was sole source last year, which is why we did it, because I know this very exact question came up. So I would ask us if we want to get new opinions, then let's get new opinions for the next fiscal year, not this upcoming one, right? But not to jeopardize in any way right now the flow of funding, because we had the legal opinion already.
So as a matter of clarification, sole source is a procurement method. It is, and so we are not legally able to circumvent procurement generally, in my experience, and somebody can correct me here, but with sole source, what you can do is you have to publish your reason for doing a sole source contract and give a period for objection. And then if there is an objection, it gets way more complicated. There are any number of other ways to procure, including RFPs. And, I think we all feel that this wraparound support for students in our schools is important. And what I would suggest is that if we want to, by explicit vote here, or by agreement, put some goals around this money and maybe values or parameters that might include having a presence in the schools and leveraging additional funds and community resources, which is incredibly important. The board can provide those goals, but I don't believe it's legal for us to designate an individual contractor and circumvent procurement. And sole source is a procurement process. Yes, Board Member Carrillo.
Obviously, I'm not suggesting that we try to do that. We need to be in compliance with the procurement laws, right? And we did so last year. And so there's a reason, and I don't even know if it was brought to you, Madam Chair, but there was a reason that I wanted to add to the agenda before Thursday of last week, an item that have been the first item after public forum, and that was for us to address this specific issue so that we could vote on it tonight, so that we could know that, yes, this is what we're going to do moving forward. And I was told that the chair would not allow that to happen for this agenda. And I didn't talk to you directly. Yeah.
Would appreciate if you would talk, because I don't know anything about this.
Okay.
And
And
if
I
you
was
have
not-
issues with the agenda, I mean, that is the role of the president, and you can always come to me.
Okay, but that's what I was instructed, which is why I didn't push the issue. Because now it's not under action, so now we can't actually do that tonight. I mean, we can give like direction informally, but we can't take a vote on that specific thing tonight. And I wish we were able to do so.
Okay, I believe I've been pretty clear, and I would appreciate if, because nobody can tell you and I that we can't talk about the agenda and items like that. So I, again, would reiterate, please come to me if you have items you want to put on the agenda. Board Member Cashman.
Back to my original question, why I asked whether we were going to do a large sum contract or a lot of mini contracts, because mini contracts, and I just say, let's say I give 40,000 here, 20,000 here, 100,000 here. We've got a lot of efforts, and it dilutes probably having a comprehensive wraparound services for our kids. So my preference is, in having dealt extensively with procurement, I don't think there's a board member here that would say we are not going to follow procurement laws. But I think it would behoove us to have a contract for whatever we're going to do, not many little contracts that may inhibit people that can't provide, a full comprehensive services. But I think that's what we probably need for this line item. The other thing that I wanted to ask the superintendent for, and it probably picks up on some of Board Member Carrillo's concern, is contracting can take a long time. When would we be expecting to go out for a contract? Because right now, and I think it's fair to acknowledge, we do have a partner in the community, and they have to plan for what are they doing come the fall. And if, so they have to, they have employees, they have people. So what is this time frame for our contract? Is it going to extend numerous months, and then we've left a partner in the community not knowing what type of funding they're getting, if they choose to apply for the funding, which I would think they would.
Madam President, members of the board, as soon as the board takes action on the budget, we would put the contract out, put the RFP out.
And just a follow on, and I know where some, besides following procurement laws, I still think, again, which I brought up last year and the board said no, I will bring it up again. If there is concern that we are hearing from our community members that, wait a minute, I didn't get a chance to get some money from Santa Fe Public Schools and I need this, I think we need to go back. I don't know what it should be, but a policy. And I know the board voted it down and said it's not needed. I think it is needed, so we as an individual board member are not picking winners and losers. There's a set criteria. What is your track record? Have you provided this in the past? And until we do a policy, then each year, and then maybe just some broad guidelines, but I think we need to, if I want to start Cashman's community wraparound services, whatever that might be, how do I, besides just an RFP, are we saying that you know, and I think we need to know, you know, to address to our constituents, yes, you can look at this is what the board is looking for, you know, inputs. Now, I know the RFP does lay out qualifications, but it seems like we are being approached individually, and everybody is doing great things in this community, and everybody is scrambling for funds, you know, and so I still think we need a policy.
And I will say, I believe I said it when you brought it up the first time, that I agree. I think we do need a policy. I think it's very complicated because obviously we procure a lot of services. And so if it's just around wraparound services, if it's around community supports, you know, I think it does need some work to define what that would be. And this, again, having worked also with procurement, I appreciate the superintendent's approach here because I think it's reasonably likely that with the sole source that we would get an objection, which does slow things down substantially. And, you know, for what it's worth, I think we have heard, at least from Board Member Cashman, that a speedy procurement process is important. I would agree with that. I think, you know, providing wraparound services, leveraging additional funds, a proven track record, these are all values and goals that I think are important in doing this work. And having, you know, demonstrated relationships in the schools and, you know, I'm sure there are other things, and I trust that our staff can do a good job around this. Board Member Price. Vice President Price.
I voted against it last time, and I've changed my opinion. I think you're right. I think we do need a policy.
Board Member Carrillo.
Then we can have a policy, but not that it affects this coming fiscal year. Because we could have done that last time and we didn't. And even though the board said at the time we didn't need a policy, I don't recall there being an actual vote on that. But, okay, I don't recall there being an actual vote on that. But any time during the year, the board, a board member could have, with the staff's help, written a policy and brought it to the board and had it on the agenda, and we didn't. With relative to procurement, if, so we have communities and schools, and I mean, they have, you know, the $450 that I of course support them getting from us, and then the rest of their money that they raise themselves. But if, you know, ABC School Supports, they want to bid on this, and there's some company in El Paso, and they say, we can do the same thing for less, okay? And so they come in with, and I'm just curious how the scenario is handled. They come in and say, you're giving them $450, you could give us $325, and we can do the same work. How is it okay for us to, if that scenario were to happen, to say, you know what, thanks for that, for undercutting, you know, CIS. However, what you can't do is provide continuity of service. And then there is also no guarantee that you'll even be around next year to do so, or the year after, or the year after. And so under the procurement laws, how much are we bound to take this bid simply because it's lower, not consider all of the things that are quantitative, and be able to say, you know, that's nice that it's lower, but we're still going to go with what we know works.
Madam President, members
And then a
of the board.
follow-on after that.
Madam President, and members of the board. Lowest price is not necessarily what you have to take. You can set a variety of criteria. Also, in this instance, which is unique, which is why I think that they could fall under sole source, but I also get the complications with sole source that you can set parameters in just a regular RFP that they're leveraging a considerable amount more money than just what we're getting. And so it's going to be difficult, I think, for a company like that to do that. You can also give points to local preference. You can, there's a track record of success. There's just many variables that can go into the RFP.
Yeah.
It's different from a bid process, which is usually lower cost. Board Member Cashman.
And I just want to remind us as board members, we cannot advocate for one contractor versus another contractor because we can get into trouble for that. Even though sometimes we would prefer somebody, but so I just remind people that you can't, because then they can say that the contract was not an open and fair contract. So I just remind us that we just need to watch our comments a little bit, that we may love a program, and I think both Board Member Carrillo and I do love what Communities in Schools does for the district, but we're looking at a contract that provides a service, and it's not necessarily a particular.
Multiple contracts or multiple people coming into bid on this. We can, of course, we can say and consider someone sole source, as our council has, and then continue on with the next fiscal year. So that was the main question I had in terms of the qualitative stuff, because I know that we do that relative to construction contracts, someone's experience building schools, things, all the different things that may come into play. The other thing I would want the board to consider, and Ms. Tilt brought it up on this particular issue, is, and I know this is a really big deal for this board, we've made it a priority, is equity. Equity. And that's where CIS comes into play as well. As much as we always try, and the state's tried very feebly, to create a level playing field for people when they're youngsters, getting ready for pre-K or whatever, I think this takes a huge leap in addressing equity in Santa Fe Public Schools in our district. So that should be it for me on this one for now, on page 6.
One question I do have on this, are we restricted, or can we do a multi-year contract? I know by state law, contracts can't exceed 4 years, but we could procure for something that, according to available funds, can be a more than a single-year contract.
Madam President, members of the board, I know that we can do multi-year contract. I'm going to defer to staff. What's the maximum?
I believe it's 4 years.
Thank you. Board Member
It's
Carrillo.
so funny. It's so funny that you brought that up, because probably at some point in June, I was going to bring up that I don't want to go through this every May. Yeah, good. So I thought we could go 5 years, but it's good to know it's 4, and that's something that I personally would be looking at in supporting. And then, of course, if we did that, it would be CIS, obviously partial to them, coming up with their 4-year plan, their 4-year strategic plan for the Santa Fe Public Schools. So thank you for asking that question.
Yes, and contingent upon available funding in future years type of thing. All right, we moving on? Page 7. Vice President Price.
I'm sad to see we're losing the attendance coaches, but c'est la vie.
We're adding them.
Oh.
We lost
I
the
thought
funding.
it blew.
We lost the funding from
Oh,
the
okay.
state,
Oh.
and we're adding it in.
Board Member Cashman.
Again, on attendance coaches, do we know why the state decided to bring that above the line?
I'm not certain. I know that Mr. Gebhardt is out there. Do you have any additional info about why they moved it above the line? Other than, the legislature is, I really don't know. I don't know if it was in the base budget, if they felt like they put more money at risk, because theoretically we generated that extra money for at risk, but it didn't net out. But we were told it was put in the SCG. I don't know why.
So I would just comment on on that. A lot of times when you're at risk, you're not showing up to school. And so that's part of, again, what the lawsuit is about, trying to get those things. So again, I look at that as a program, and I just think, we're playing shuffling games, and if you didn't take that money that you had used for attendance coaches last year, or the grant, and push that all up above, and maybe they did. I was just curious why they decided not to continue to fund that.
So my understanding again is that it was put up above the line, but as you recall, when we did our math for the Santa Fe Public Schools, it would not have netted enough money to do that.
Board Member Carrillo.
I'll start with attendance coaches. Thank you for putting that back in, but how are we getting bang for our buck there? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because I have someone in my district whose kid has since left Santa Fe High School and had a habit of not attending any of his afternoon classes in his senior year. And in one case, over 26 absences for a particular class. And letters were not sent, follow-up was not done. I mean, it was really, and so I just want to make sure that our attendance coaches are, those letters are going out, whatever it is it's 3 to 5 days, and then after 10, it's being referred to wherever it needs to be referred to. I just want to make sure that kids aren't falling through the cracks, because exactly what Ms. Cashman said, sometimes the attendance thing is that first red flag for us, that something's going on at home or whatever, so that we can then address it with whatever services and staff we have available.
Thank you, Madam President.
Please.
Assistant Superintendent Gephardt, I know that you all took a different approach on how to use the attendance coaches, and then if you can also address how the letters are generated and whatnot.
So, President Noble, members of the board, Board Member Carrillo. So we do have one attendance coach at Santa Fe High, one at Capitol High, and then we have some at the middle school as well. And it's not perfect. They aren't able to reach every single student. It would be great if we could have 4 or 5 at every single school, at each of our larger high schools, I should say. The letters are generated automatically, so I'd have to find out for this specific instance why the letter wasn't sent. I know I received the letters, and I know that our attendance coach at Santa Fe High actually worked with me and my son. Hopefully he's not watching, from home right now. I don't mean to
call him out,
calling him out here, but I do know that it worked for us. But it's not perfect, and like I said, we actually need more, not less, and so I'd have to look at the specific instance that you're talking about.
And maybe some of it has to do with Power School and whatever.
It could be. I know that sometimes we do get a little bit hassled for the letters going out too much. And we have many parents who will ask us to take them off the automatic, and I don't know that we can or not, right?
No, we can, and we have. So Crystal Ibata works with the school and the attendance coach to turn those letters or those notifications off.
Okay.
Because I get a lot of them, and my child is sick sometimes, and we get calls. I mean, honestly, I really don't like them. I understand their utility, but I would love to turn that off. Board Member Cashman.
I'm not done on my. Okay,
apologies.
Yeah, go ahead.
On that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that should be an option. Parents should know. I would want to know when my kids are not at school. Now, I may call you and say, they are at school. Where are they? But I think, or I may say, I've already told the teacher, but I don't know that should be an option. I think parents need to know, because if you're getting too many of them, something's going on, and and what about the one day you don't get it and your kid's not there at school? I mean, if it's not probably at the real young level, but it can be, they're not there. I want to know where my kids are. I wanted to know that, and I also wanted to scream and say, what do you mean the teacher They sat in class. The teacher called them out on something, and what do you mean you're reporting them as absent? The teachers, so I want to have a check and balance, not only on the students, but also on the teachers to make sure the teachers are, and I know as a teacher that was the most important thing for me is attendance, because if something happens and somebody from law enforcement comes and says, your kid was at the mall and a robbery was committed, and I say, no, they're in school. Those records have to be maintained. So I'm not sure. I would like you to maybe relook at that policy if we're just turning them off.
So to continue, you can comment on that, because I agree. I doubt it's the little kids that are ditching school, and but it's the middle school and high school kids. But I would agree with Ms. Cashman that if I understand at the elementary level why it's like, enough already. My kid's sick. It's whatever. If it's 3 days, I know. But at the high school level. So then I'm curious as to, have we seen with the attendance coaches less truancy? Is there bang for our buck?
So they've sort of changed the target on us. It's gone from truancy to excessive absences. And so with truancy, it's unexcused absences is what we're talking about. But they've changed it over the last couple of years to take a look more at the all absences, excused and unexcused. And so it's hard to say. We don't have a lot of data over the years that we can point to, because the numbers have, or the target has changed. If that makes sense.
So it makes sense. It's just disturbing, because I know that in New Mexico in general, I remember looking at the map, and actually you can just look at the map, it's online, where there's, yellow, orange, and red. And there is so much red in New Mexico for excessive truancy. And our districts may not be red, but it was red-orange definitely when I looked last. And so I would say that next year at this time, I would want to see results with this $200,000. Not in results in terms of how we're following up on kids, because you're right, it can be excused, but a kid's not going to learn if they're not in school. And I'm glad you're taking him to wherever, Mozambique for the week, for the month, but he's got to still be in school. So anyway, I just want a little more accountability on that. It's a lot of money. So on page 7 also, does anyone have anything else on attendance?
I just want to say that I appreciate what our Chamber of Commerce has been doing, and I think there are other partners to celebrate really strong attendance. And so, of course, nothing happens in a vacuum. And again, anecdotally, from what I hear in the schools, is that the Chamber's rewards program is getting noticed, and kids are being celebrated for really good attendance, and I think that positive reinforcement is very important in this area as well.
And on that, I'm glad you mentioned that, so, because it's still attendance. So I remember at one of the conferences I went to years ago, there was a district that had 2 car dealerships, and if a kid had perfect attendance through senior year for their entire time in that district, they got a car. And so it was, it was, if I'm recalling, it was like 1 or 2. This is not, to have no absences from K through senior year. And it was kind of cool. I don't know that we're doing that. Did we ever do anything with the city on the bus drivers? Yeah, because in terms of bus drivers telling kids, it's like, that are getting on the bus, shouldn't you be in school? Because I know that was something that we talked about. Not kicking them off the bus, but just advocating, shouldn't you be in school?
I don't think it was something that was just sort of discussed, but I don't know that we ever really took action. I know that there was discussion about should they even be on the bus.
Yeah.
That was another issue, but I don't think we ever really came to an action item to move forward on. It was more of a discussion.
I can tell you, and it was under Superintendent Boyd, because I was in a meeting where Chainbreaker came to see then Mayor Gonzalez about it, and was very clear that they saw this as an equity issue that would lead to profiling, that questioning students, and this was to I believe the proposal was had a little more teeth rather than what you suggested, just asking, shouldn't you be in
I
school
remember it
type
had a
of
lot
thing.
more teeth, yeah.
Mayor, yes, and Mayor Gonzalez, I think, saw that very clearly, and it was sort of done. But I did sit through a meeting because Mayor Gonzalez had initially said, okay, we want to partner with the schools on this request, and I don't even have any idea why I was in that meeting, but I remember the discussion from Chainbreaker around issues of equity and different student schedules and what you would end up sort of profiling kids who were working on odd hours and maybe doing different things than a standard school schedule.
Right, I get it. So I am done.
I think Board
I have
Member or
more-
Vice President
on this
Price has
issue,
it
or-
on this point.
Great, oh yeah, of course.
Vice President Price.
First, a little anecdote. When I was teaching at Santa Fe High, I had a student who had multiple absences, and I was concerned. I went into the principal, and the principal called the parent. And this happens, and it happened to me. The parent said that the child had a migraine headache. And the principal asked, the student has missed 20 consecutive days. And the parent said the child had a migraine headache. So this is a conundrum that we're in. We tried a number of years ago to partner with the city and the police, and we ended up arresting one woman. She was on, not we, the police. She was on the front page of the New Mexican doing the perp walk. Turns out it was the aunt of one of our principals. So there's a limit to how much we can do. So when we consider the data, we have to consider other things also. Okay.
Well, if the parents are complicit. So I'm done with attendance, but I have more on page 7. Does anyone? Okay. So social media specialists. Is this what Doug does, or what's the $30,000 for?
So there he is again.
You
This
hold
was
it, you
this was
just-
a pilot project that we had last year that really proved to be effective. Understanding it's a stipend, right, for someone to take that on at each of our schools.
Right, President Noble, board members. The social media stipends, the idea was that a lot of our parents are from the social media generation, and our schools hadn't created social media accounts. They weren't utilizing it to engage the parents. And so what we did was we tried this year having a social media manager at each school site. And so the $30,000 paid for those stipends. And they were trained. We had 2 different trainings. There were certain requirements that they had to meet. We actually developed our best practices based on what was working at our schools here in Santa Fe. So the team actually built the best practices, and the idea is that we'll continue that next year so that these individuals who are managing the social media for the school sites will earn that stipend. And
it's been quite effective. I mean, when we've had safety issues, when we've had dispelling rumors, K5+, I mean, a variety of important issues to really, a different way to reach our parents and engage them.
And I would say I've seen an explosion of schools on social media, and I love it. There are wonderful photos, and I appreciate what you say, Jeff, that the parameters were followed, because I have wondered how they're all so well behaved and not, stepping outside of what would be appropriate lines for schools. So that makes sense, that the training has been effective, and I would just say maybe in the next year we can think about some hashtags. I mean, I love the We Are SFPS. Hasn't really caught fire, but hashtags are, something that if we establish some common ones, could help across social media platforms.
So I guess with this, the only thing that I want to see is that there's continuity. So the principal is really making sure that this is being followed through and done, and it's not dependent on, the parent or somebody or a teacher, a parent whose kid ages out, or a teacher who leaves the school. So that, it's hard, but so there's continuity in the program.
Mr. President, Madam President, Board Member Carrillo, if I may.
Yes, please.
I mean, of course, we would like to have continuity, but principals do leave, and parents sometimes do. But with that said, we probably would onboard, if there are new people, probably do another training at the beginning of this year. But the other piece is that the reason we did this is we were relying on principals or assistant principals or people that weren't paid, and it was haphazard, correct?
Right, so the accounts are actually part of Santa Fe Public Schools. And so when a social media manager leaves the district, the account stays. For a while there, we had everybody, it was a free-for-all. People were just creating their own Santa Fe. In fact, there are a couple Santa Fe Public Schools Facebook accounts out there that were just kind of floating around. So when you searched for them, a few different ones would come up. And so this is our way of controlling that. So when people leave, we hold on to it. We have been following all of the different social media outlets for the different schools. We're keeping track of it. And then, like I said, developing the best practices from that, because what works in, say, Boston, Massachusetts may not work here in Santa Fe. And so it's great getting our social media managers together, and they share what's working, and they have the analytics to show it too. They can see how many people clicked on it, how many people liked it, how many people commented. And so we actually have data to show the effectiveness of the engagement for these initiatives. In some schools, it's better than others, but we're working on it. And we're going to continue to work on it if it's approved.
One other point I want to make on that, Madam President, is that we need to better market the Santa Fe Public Schools. There are amazing things happening in our district that people just hear about in the announcements, but how far is this really spread? We put it out on press releases. The press doesn't pick it up to the level that we would like. People do pay attention to social media, and when I have people come, like there's an idea that someone had around a school on coding or whatnot. And it's like, do you know about our computer science resolution? No. Do you know what's happening at Santa Fe High, that they, win these contests? Do you know about kids winning robotics contests? They don't know what's going on. I think if we can capitalize on social media more, and this was the first year doing it, and I think it was very successful, but I think this will grow and build, and I hope that we can bring more people back to the Santa Fe Public Schools that aren't aware of all the amazing things that are happening in our district. And I think this is another powerful tool beyond just our need to communicate with our parents, but to better tell our story to our community.
Thanks.
Board Member Cashman.
I would like to thank you, Superintendent, to being listening to board member concerns. I'm glad that we're moving. Even though we can't get to registered nurses next year, we are going to make sure that all of our schools have a health professional full-time at the schools, because kids don't get sick only on Mondays or only on a certain day. And I also think to have someone taking that role as a lead librarian. Of course, I would like to see certified librarians at all of our, but this is, again, a step to getting us heading in the right direction. So I appreciate you listening to the board members' concerns. And just one other question. I see that vaping, it says we're going to fund that through grants. Do we know that the grants are going to be available, or is it going to be, well, maybe we get it and maybe we don't?
I think we will continue to look at existing resources and other grants that may be possible. I think that there will be, even through the tobacco fund, there very well may be a grant that we might be able to apply for $30,000. We're not asking for, or 25, not looking at tons of money. Also, I think, we'll just look at our budget as we continue through this year, but we will get it done. And then the dyslexia, my understanding is there is state funding available for that.
I also wanted to say thank you very much for the lead librarian stipend contract. And just to reiterate, the city of Santa Fe has all of its really a number of significant leadership positions open at the Santa Fe libraries, and I think we'll be looking at an updated library plan. So I hope we can find some collaboration and leverage there in terms of partnership with the city. and really working to have, at least in this next school year and moving towards perhaps fully licensed librarians back in all our schools, but a really good approach to digital literacy, media literacy. I think this is, the intersection of a lot of things in our libraries, and they need to be the centers of research competence so that the students in the Santa Fe Public Schools can tell the difference between real and fake news, and maybe we can not have so many vulnerable to strange pushes on social media from whatever forces lie beyond, and we can tell the difference. And I also just want to say that on the social media specialists, I really have seen it grow this year, and Cesar Chavez is kind of killing it right now. The presence is really, really lovely, and I wonder what the analytics say, but I'm guessing they say that pictures of kids win, and there have been some really wonderful visuals, particularly from Cesar Chavez recently. EJ Martinez is another one that's done a good job. I would say Gonzalez has done a good job as well. And I hope that, I don't know how the stipends work, and I don't need to know, but that we are actually building capacity and not giving it to the same people over and over, because of course social media is an exponential exercise. So the more people we get involved, the better it works. Okay, moving on to page 8. Thank you for the explanation, I would say, about the difference between a deficit and a gap. I think that's very, very important, that we recognize that there was never a deficit, and we can make the gap as big as we want if we funded all the librarians and licensed social workers and, attendance coaches in the world. We could have a much larger gap, but it is a gap. Board Member Carrillo.
I hope there's a certain member of the Senate that is hearing what you just said.
Me too. Any other questions on this page? Page 9. Board Member Cashman.
I just want us as board members to realize that this $900,000 from special ed, that's not going to always be available. And so, that helped us. But, we can't think, that's close to $1 million. We can't expect that every year we're going to have $1 million from special ed because services get more expensive, just like everything else in life. So I just want us to be aware of that. So when you're thinking, because I always try to think not just today, but a couple of years out.
That point.
How are we going to, we've got needs and wants, I think more needs than wants. And, we've got to look at how we're going to get money for future years, because it probably is not going to always come from that we're graduating, 170 seniors.
Dr. Garcia.
So I just want to point out that if more kids are identified, we'll see increase in funding. And in terms of the ancillary services and support services, there is always an overage there for admin to support those programs. Once we make these cuts, you're cut in the base, so it balances. So you should be okay, because we've ebbed and flowed every year since I've been here. I know that, looking at Ms. Lucero, there have been some years where that cut has been higher.
Okay, page 10. Vice President Price is very happy, for the record. And thank you for getting a clear cash balance for us. Board Member Cashman.
I talked with the superintendent, but school nutrition, even though we have a deficit right now, we as board members need to be very concerned about what's happening at the national level as far as the Obama administration's rollback on healthy school lunches. Mm-hmm. So, if we continue to do what we're doing right now, probably that deficit would be a lot higher. So there's probably going to have to be some adjustments over time. And so I just want to make sure that we understand, you know, that school nutrition is indirectly taking a hit from what we would like to see our kids eating healthier meals, because it costs more to serve healthy meals.
Can I ask, is that correct? Would we be seeing a larger deficit if we, I think if I understand what you just said, if we had not rolled back nutrition, which the federal government did, that there would be a larger deficit if we had continued with the Obama-era nutrition guidelines?
No, that's not what this is.
No, this one is different, but what I'm just saying is, since school nutrition is called out here, eventually I would see that we're not going to be providing the same quality of meals, you know, because the federal government isn't going to be giving us those dollars.
Well, I think what we're going to have to look at, I mean, we obviously, this year, if that changes, we could not subsidize it. And so we are going to have to be able to provide the lunches and the breakfast at the level that we are funded, because it's not the intent that the operational budget subsidize food services. I remember when I was here a long time ago, it was subsidized by a couple of $1 million, and over time, you guys got that fixed, and food services, you know, was self-supporting. I'm looking, if you would come up here, please. Did you hear the question, Ms. Cole? Well, I mean, I don't think we know. I think it depends on what Congress does, and is it really rolled back. But the bottom line is, and maybe we would have to look at the foundations, see if somebody would want to subsidize it. But we do not have the funding, even though we have the heart, to subsidize the food services program if the guidelines change so much that we have to, you know, we're not funded to provide the nutritious, and it's questionable whether it's, you know, how nutritious the meals are at present. Some people would argue that they could be better, right?
So as I understand it, the 25,000 up there is the school lunches and the kids that, you know, we run a deficit because kids don't pay. Great. So there's two things. First, anybody see the article in today's paper? I can't remember the district that was, or parents that were suing the district because the district was giving the kids white bread and grape jelly because they didn't have money in their account, right? I'm just really glad that we don't do that. That we still give everyone a great meal no matter what. So to what Ms. Cashman is saying, we are going to be confronted with this if certainly, I mean, this president wants to roll back everything that Michelle Obama did in terms of nutrition and give kids SpaghettiOs, white bread, processed wheat. I mean, everything that costs less that is not good for our children. So I would want us, if this comes up in the next cycle, to say no, even though you want to poison your kids with all this, you know, processed food, we don't want to, and find ways, we may very well have to find ways to subsidize nutrition again. And so, you know, maybe coming down the pike.
And I guess what I'm just saying is we need to let our legislators know and whatnot, because I can tell you, and this is what I want to reiterate, where we are right now, unless there's, you know, significant influx of money that is not tied to program, we don't have a lot of places to cut to subsidize it. Now, you know, can we go to outside providers and see if they would be willing to help? Or we have to let them, you know, hopefully, or this could become a state issue with the legislature saying it's bad enough that we're an impoverished state and many kids, this is their only source of nutrition, that the state subsidize this funding, because we ourselves don't have the money to do it. We may have the heart to want to do it, but I don't think we can subsidize it.
Can I ask where we are on the regulations? Has anything changed in the past year, and what is your understanding of what has been changed, and if there is any coherent timeline to that?
Madam President, board members, Dr. Garcia, to this point, they have not changed any regs. They have talked about, block grants a little bit, so that caps how much funding we would get, but that has not passed at this point. Every district in the nation is, of course, fighting that because, yeah, you would end up subsidizing every district would end up subsidizing nutrition. So I don't know if that's going to push through or not. They have had some leniency on the regs, as Mr. Carrillo said, with what we can offer to students, but most of it has not changed. And in our case, we're not going backwards, so we're going to stay where we are because it's harder to change again, and our students are already pretty accepting. So at this point, regs are standing.
Thank you. And it's clearly one to watch and advocate for. We cannot roll back kids' nutrition. Vice President Price.
I hope you all remember that I was responsible for bringing up getting peanut butter out of the, used to be they would give a peanut butter and jelly sandwich if a kid couldn't pay for it. I just wanted to remind you that Dr. Boyd said that he was going to have all the peanut butter delivered to my house.
Well, you're looking.
Okay, moving swiftly along. Page 11. Board Member Carrillo?
Figured page 11 would be the place to ask this question because this is where we have salary increases related expenses. And the question for the superintendent would be, how have you calculated the possible financial changes relative to what may be negotiated for the coming fiscal and following years? Negotiated in the CBA.
Do you mind asking that question again?
I'm not asking specifically about what's issues, which is how have you taken into account what's going on with the CBA now? Because unfortunately,
I've taken into account. It's in the budget.
Well, okay, then I'll take your word.
Thank you, sir.
I would love a quick explanation for myself and the record of ad valorem taxes.
Madam President and members of the board, Dr. Garcia, ad valorem taxes are local taxes, so anything that is a residential or non-residential property, it is taxed based off of what the assessed value of that property is, and then there's a specific amount to that, to each of those property or assessed property values. I'd have to go back and reference the specific amount, but I believe it's about $1 per every $1,000 of assessed value that is taxed as far as an ad valorem, and that's specific to property real property, so actual residential property.
So if I understand correctly, there is a small amount of money that is on property taxes that we get from our tax base in the Santa Fe Public School District, even though the majority of what happens is centralized and put into the SEG.
That's correct, Madam President.
And the good news is, if the trend continues, that amount would go up.
That's
Thank
correct.
you. Yes, the trend I refer to as property values increasing. Anything else on page 11? Page 12? Again, thank you. I appreciate this. The difference between operational, and then the different funds, I think, is a very important thing to put out there for the sake of transparency and everybody's understanding. Page 13. Oh, on page 12, Board Member Carrillo.
I did it on 12 because I didn't know where else to ask. Just curious, it could have been, I guess, on page 14. And since you're sitting at the table, do we have an idea of what we will be bonding for in 2021?
We will be bringing to the board, probably in June, I would imagine, our recommendation for your election cycle. We did have a staff meeting with bond counsel and bond advisors. I would say that we're not looking at any tax increases, but keeping things as they are. But in terms of how those elections roll out, we will be bringing that to you either the 6th or the 17th of June.
Right, but I know that we don't want to, certainly in this political climate, we don't want to have any tax increase at all. And where would that leave us, though, and what would the maximum be available that we could bond for?
I think would be 125 million.
Right.
Didn't we do 125 last year, or did we do 100? Okay, so it would be 100. And then I don't know for SB 9 and,
Right.
well, we just did SB 9, so it would be, which one, Christy? HB 33 would be the following one. Do you know that dollar amount, more or less?
It was mostly GeoBond I was curious about, so I'm
So it'd
good.
be 100 million.
All right, thanks.
Page 13. I guess this is the page upon which I say the complexity of school budgets, the more I understand them, is confounding. And honestly, no private business would be expected to budget this way or even think it responsible, given that, of course, in the past few years we have seen changes in the unit value in the middle of the year. We have seen cash balances swept by the state. And this page, I bring it up because it really illustrates how many unknown factors there are at the time when we basically need to adopt our budget as a board. And, you know, I am just more and more impressed by school finance officials. And I would say that Mr. Martinez has done an extraordinary job this year, coming in and being thrown right into the budget process. And Dr. Garcia, I know I said this to you when we did our budget meeting, but I really appreciate how much more transparent and understandable the budget has become over the years. And this year, not only do we have that, as well as the ongoing changes that the school district has to adjust to during the budget process. But this year we also have, it's a good problem to have, but the K-5 Plus and extended learning, which was an incredibly tight turnaround, and is another couple of X factors or new factors to factor into the whole thing. And like I say, this slide illustrates it for me because we need to turn into our budget to the Public Education Department by June 5th. We have a bunch of empty columns here. And again, the more, and I've seen city budgets, I've coached a lot of individual businesses through their budgets, and nothing is as wild as school district budgeting. So again, thank you, Dr. Garcia. Thank you to all the staff at the senior level, at the district level, at the schools, and to the SACs, because this has been a real community process. And to the board, you know, I really appreciate all of the good questions that have come up during the process, and I think we are a long way in terms of transparency, a balanced budget, and really making sense of what is a wild way to do budgeting. So, anyone have questions on this page? Page 14. Board Member Cashman?
I probably know this, but I don't. Why did the special capital outlay go up about $275,000?
That was Madam President, special appropriations that we got this year. We got more money than last year from the legislature. A big chunk of that, Mr. Martinez, was the generator. And there was a lot more capital money.
Did you already provide us a list of that? Could you just re-provide it to me?
Sure.
Because I'm sort of
Mr. Martinez, do you want to comment on that at all?
Madam President, Superintendent Garcia, members of the board, we actually just did the bond agreements, so they are through and everything, and our it actually increased more than what's showing there. It's about 1.4 million. The Santa Fe Public School District is carrying one for, or the Santa Fe Dance Barns had put one in NDI for 530, so that increased it. We also got another one for about 10,000 for Milagro that they initially didn't show that we had gotten, but the bond agreement came through, so we did get that. So, but yeah, I have a list, and I can provide that to the superintendent for her to provide you that with reversion dates and everything. Those will be moving forward quickly.
And if I may, Madam President, I'd really like to thank Mr. Martinez. Since he's been on board, he's created a really good reporting structure and working with General Services and the legislature to make sure we don't miss timelines and prevent reversions.
Page 15. Debt service. Page 16. Again, I love a pie chart. Very nice, visual, thank you. Page 17. Board Member Cashman.
I know we do negotiations with our unions, and it's ongoing during this time frame. You know, next year, from what I understand, we may be negotiating the full contract. If at all possible, it might help to move that negotiations up earlier, and so we're not, well, I just think it's confusing to be negotiating with them while we're trying to get a budget, and we don't really know. Not that we need to know the details, but we need to know how much it's going to cost us as a board. And so, you know, I would like to see it moved up earlier, but that's my personal preference than waiting right at the same time we're trying to do the budget.
Madam President?
Dr. Garcia.
So probably just about every school district does it this way, just because we don't know what the unit value is even going to be until April. We don't, I mean, and in a 30-day session, we'll probably know in March. And this year, that went back and forth. We can start negotiations earlier around non-monetary issues, but keep in mind that as we get to the real horse trading, you can't separate money from bargaining issues. Last year, we didn't complete the negotiations until after the budget was completed, and that is not uncommon either. So I know that we have, Ms. Wagner is working with the union that you work with, and we're hoping to get this done fairly soon. I know that we're ready. We're waiting for them. With NEA, where's Ms. Zink? There you are. You're meeting this week, right? And what's your best guess of when they will go to ratification? Okay. And so we, I don't think there's been any changes on issues since we've updated you. So we hope to just stay on course. I think we'll get done earlier this year than last year.
Okay, any additional discussion on budget priorities? Board Member Cashman.
Just a general comment. Thank you to the superintendent, her staff, and everyone that worked on the budget. If we had to go back to, I think it was page 4 with all of those, and we, the board, had to figure it out. I don't know how many of us would be coming back to sit here. So thank you for, I know it's not easy to do this, and I appreciate all the work.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, if I may. Thank you, Board Member Cashman, members of the board. I just want to thank the staff. They're amazing, and they put up with me because I get pretty intense during this time frame. And we're all still speaking to each other, and I think we still like each other too. But it has been a tremendous process from the SACs through the schools, but coming back, well, every time we brought a budget to you, it has been intense, but particularly in the last 2 weeks to get to this point. And again, a great team in the finance office, but great cabinet, great SS cabinet directors, all of you, the principals. I just can't thank everyone enough for their professionalism, hard work, and creativity, and willingness to compromise. Thank you.
Board Member Carrillo.
So I, I assume that's the end of this agenda, section 4. Is that right? Or were you planning on, because I have something.
I had one question, which was, the plan is for us to look at, is there more than this, the entire operating budget that will be ready for approval on May 21st?
So my intent, unless there was any major tweaking of this budget by you today, is not to do a presentation on the 21st, but just have it on as an action item.
Board Member Carrillo.
So wouldn't it then follow that we have to decide on what we're doing relative to communities and schools tonight? And I'm sorry Mr. Garcia is not here because pretty much every school in his district has pretty intense CIS involvement. So I am not opposed to the idea of a policy. I mean, I think, or some sort of regulation or some sort of procedure that the board goes through next year, and it could be some multiple year thing. But I would make a motion that we accept that line item of the budget in keeping the base at 200,000 for CIS and keeping the 250,000 as it's part of, because we have to decide tonight, right? If she's going to present, well, if she's going to present, if Dr. Garcia and staff are going to present a final budget for approval on the 21st, then it would stand to reason that that was an issue that we spent the majority of the night discussing, that we'd have to decide on that tonight so that they could then move forward.
What do you imagine is the decision point, given that there's $250,000 in the support line item? We've been told there's $200,000 in the base, making a total of $450,000 that needs to be procured.
Okay, so if there's no decision point, that's fine with me. It means we're accepting that for this fiscal year, $450,000 will be allotted to CIS. I'm fine with there not being a motion or an agenda item or a decision point. If it's here and if the plan is that we're going to accept this on next Tuesday, then that's swell. But next Tuesday, if I'm sitting in this, no, I'll be sitting in that seat. If I'm sitting in that seat and all of a sudden we're discussing this fresh all over again, I'm going to be pissed.
So when you say discussing this fresh
The line
all
item
over again.
for community support services for at-risk students at $250,000. I don't want us going over the 45 minutes of discussion that we had tonight, having to do this all over again a week from Tuesday, a week from tomorrow. Because if we're accepting the budget, I'm not sure how I'm not making myself clear, because you furrowed your brow in a way that, so if we're accepting the budget
I could try
a week,
Botox so that you can't see the furrowed brows.
yeah, right. So if we're accepting the budget pretty much as we've discussed tonight next Tuesday, which I think is great. I mean, I think you've done a stellar job. I love the one-on-ones. I like the way it appears. I like everything we've gone over. But I'm concerned that a week from tomorrow, this will come up again, and then it may be a cog in the wheel of approval, and now we're up against the clock.
Are you going to bring it up again?
No, but I know that we don't have someone, we were missing someone who it's, you know, all of the schools in that district directly benefit from CIS. And I know that in the last time this was discussed, there were challenges. And I'm happy to wait. You want to wait till next Tuesday? That's totally cool with me.
Well, I don't really understand the question. I mean, what I have heard tonight is that we have no objections to that $250,000 being there for community support for at-risk students. We also have been told there's $200,000 in the base and that we need to procure that. So I guess I don't understand what the question is. I mean, certainly Secretary Garcia has the right to ask questions before he votes on the budget.
Of course.
I'm also under the impression that we could vote to accept the budget tonight, given that we have possible action on the agenda. So, you know, it is up to the board if we want to accept the budget, if we want to pass a budget, we can.
Right.
But I guess I am not understanding what the question or issue you're
it's
raising
less a
is.
question than a concern. And out of respect for Secretary Garcia, I'd like him to be able to vote on the budget so that it's hopefully unanimous. So I just want to, and I'm, come what may, next Tuesday, week from Tuesday is fine with me. I withdraw the idea of a motion.
Board Member Cashman.
I don't want to put words into Board Member Carrillo's mouth, but I think there is a fundamental difference, and I want to bring it up right now. So I think Board Member Carrillo is expecting whatever type of procurement process the district goes through, that money will go to communities and school. And that's not what the discussion said. There will be a procurement process, but it doesn't say that that money will go to community. And that's why I asked the question, how soon would this happen? Because I think our funders need to know, are they getting that money from us or not?
Well, I would say that
Dr. Garcia would like to clarify for a moment.
I didn't feel like she put any words in my mouth,
okay.
But we have to procure anyway, right? If we're going to have a contract with somebody, and we have to approve it because it's going to be over 50, and then it would just be sole source.
I want to clarify something. And I think that Ms. Noble tried to make the point. It's pretty nuanced. So I hope you'll follow along what I'm trying to say and keep us all legal. Because we can't say we're procuring for a particular organization. And that's what kind of is coming across. So I'm going to be real clear that we're not procuring for a particular organization. But I want to say something that I think I understood what Ms. Noble was trying to say, so now I don't want to put words in your mouth. When you sole source, if someone challenges it, it becomes far more complex. If you put it out to bid with certain caveats, it's much cleaner. And so it's a way of saying it's much better and easier if we just put it out to bid than to put it out as a sole source and have it challenged. And so what I would say is trust the procurement process, that we will follow the law, and that it will take into account the fact that we give preference if someone's leveraging more money, there'll be points for different things. And so I think that's what we're trying to say.
I'll trust the process.
Okay. Are we done with the board budget priorities discussion? We're moving on to advanced planning. And for this, at least the four of us know we can all attend on the 21st for the board meeting, yes? Okay. I would agree. I hope we can have a unanimous approval of the budget. Are there any other changes? Or yes, Dr. Garcia?
Is it all right then?
You can turn on your mic.
Madam President, then, and members of the board, so our intent is just to bring it as an action item, not as a presentation.
Yes. And, I will check in with, and I would encourage you to as well, Secretary Garcia. He did text me that he did his individual budget meeting, and he did understand the budget. And so, we can just check in to make sure that no questions or issues have come up. But, yes, I think that's, go ahead, Board Member Carrillo.
I think it's also just important to note, since it is going to be action and not presentation, that we've been working on the budget since January. And so when we take an action item on the budget, and it may only take 15 minutes, it's not as though we're breezing through this. We've been working on this for hours and hours and hours in finance committees, subcommittee meetings. And just so that the public knows that we have done as a board our due diligence. And so if the action item is 15 minutes, then it's 15 minutes. And if you weren't here, decisions are made by those that show up.
Board Member Cashman.
I guess on advanced planning, when we get, I'm sorry, thank you. I guess on advanced planning, I think we need to revisit again, when do we have study sessions and when do we have board meetings? Because you know, when we have a study session on Monday, that means most likely somebody is working over the weekend. And so if we, I guess I would like to see our fall meetings go back to Tuesday for study sessions and for board meetings, and we just stay consistent. But that's just something that we need to talk about in the future, because I think it's important to have all board members here, but if we're not going to have all board members, then I think it's important to take what we're asking the superintendent and her staff to do, and they have to work over the weekend, you know.
So if you or if any other board member would like to put that on as a board discussion and possible action item, please do so with Alma.
She's putting it on and I'm seconding.
You don't have to for board discussion and possible action. Okay, fair enough. Make it 3. All right. Any other, so you got that? Any other items on advanced planning, questions on the schedule? It's a very busy time of year. I'm sure the staff is working almost 7 days a week this time of year, no matter what.
Well, I don't know if it was last year or the year before. We used to have like this really big staff barbecue. It was either out there or across the street. What? When is it this year?
Richard, when do we normally do it? It's around the 4th of July, isn't it? Or is it the last week in June?
Yeah, last week in June.
Last week in June.
All right, good.
We'll let you guys know.
Cool.
Come and have hot dogs or hamburgers. It's fun.
Great, thanks.
Anything else? No? Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia. Thank you to everybody
y'all.
for being here. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.
One last comment. It's not on the agenda, but I think you guys all make us better by your questions, so we appreciate you for your due diligence. Thank you.
If I have it in me, I may add up the board hours, which we could multiply, but